The August sun of 1846 hung mercilessly over Natchez, Mississippi, a brutal orb that transformed the air into a thick, shimmering haze clinging to skin like a curse from some vengeful god. Dust devils swirled lazily along the town's main street, kicking up clouds of red clay that coated everything in a fine, choking grit. The wooden auction platform at the heart of the slave market creaked under the weight of human misery, its splintered planks worn smooth by the bare feet of thousands who had stood there before, their lives bartered like sacks of cotton. Chains rattled faintly against iron rings bolted into the posts, a metallic whisper that blended with the low hum of white men milling below. Planters in sweat-stained linen suits, tobacco juice staining their beards, their eyes appraising flesh with the cold calculation reserved for livestock auctions. Natchez was no backwater trading post. It was the glittering nexus of the Deep South's domestic slave trade, processing over 20,000 souls annually in 1846, funneling them from exhausted Upper South tobacco fields to the black soil cotton empires of the Delta. Steam flatboats groaned at the docks along the Mississippi River, their holds still reeking of the Middle Passage's echoes, unloading chained gangs from Virginia, Maryland, even the Carolinas. Sarah Johnson stood shackled at the wrists, her 23-year-old frame taut with the wiry strength forged by 9 merciless Mississippi summers since being ripped from her mother's arms at 15. Barefoot on scorching boards that blistered her soles through calluses thick as leather, she felt sweat trace rivulets down her dark skin, mixing with the grime of a week's forced march from a Virginia holding pen where she'd been crammed with 200 others, fed corn mush twice daily, allowed water only from a stagnant trough. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding despite the bone-deep exhaustion, scanned the crowd methodically. A fat merchant from New Orleans pinching a boy's arm to test muscle, a preacher in black broadcloth murmuring about divine order while fingering his Bible, women in calico bonnets averting gazes, knowing they'd wield the real power in big house kitchens. Sarah's mind raced through survival calculus. She'd seen sisters broken on the block, auctioneers stripping them to the waist for inspection, bidders probing teeth like horse traders. This was her third sale. Each had carved deeper scars, but also sharper instincts. The auctioneer's gravelly voice boomed over the din, whip cracking through humid air. "Prime field woman here, folks. Strong Virginia stock, 23 years prime. Bred for the Delta. 200 pounds cotton daily, no questions." He yanked her chin up, forcing her gaze forward as bids rose in lazy increments. $120 from a wiry trader, $130 countered by a Jefferson County planter, $140 holding steady. Sarah's heart hammered against ribs, pulse sinking with distant steamboat whistles piercing the levee fog. Then Thomas Whitmore thrust his paddle high, a 42-year-old widower from Adams County whose fortune rode on 800 acres of prime loam. $150. No takers. The gavel cracked like a rifle shot, sealing her fate before the echo died. Whitmore's face was all business, narrow jaw set, gray eyes ledger cold, already calculating depreciation rates in his head. Sarah was inventory now, line item in his plantation journal. What unfolded over the next 18 months on Whitmore Plantation would plunge Sarah into a calculated hell that reduced human dignity to barnyard pseudoscience, a master's obsession with breeding superior stock that exposed slavery's rotting core, only for her unbreakable will to forge defiance from utter degradation. The 3-hour wagon journey to the plantation snaked through pine barrens choked with kudzu vines draping like funeral shrouds, the air heavy with sharp resin tang and the metallic promise of distant thunderheads building over the river. Sarah shared the jolting bench with Marcus, a lanky 16-year-old boy from Tennessee whose first sale left him trembling uncontrollably, knees drawn to chest, eyes glassy with shock, and Aunt Ruth, a stooped woman of 50 whose lined face held the weary wisdom of 4 decades in bondage across 3 states, her hands knotted from endless ginning. Silence enveloped them like a shroud, broken only by iron-shod wheels crunching gravel ruts, the creak of axles strained by recent flooding, and the occasional piercing cry of a red-tailed hawk wheeling overhead, scouting carrion in the underbrush. Whitmore rode ahead on a bay mare, posture ramrod straight, ledger already open across saddle pommel, penciling notes on feed costs and resale values. No words passed. Speech was a luxury for the unchained. Whitmore Plantation sprawled across 800 acres of fertile lush soil, its cotton fields stretching like endless white-capped seas under the late summer sun, bowls bursting fat and heavy, promising a harvest that could make or break the year's profits amid slumping British prices. The big house loomed imperiously on a manicured hilltop, white Doric columns gleaming against ancient oaks draped in spectral Spanish moss swaying in the breeze, verandas wide enough for 20 rockers overlooking the labor below, facade of southern aristocracy masking the rot of human exploitation within its plastered walls. Below snaked 2 parallel rows of slave cabins, 20 rough-hewn shacks pieced from cypress and pine, walls mud-chinked against winter winds, dirt floors scattered with mildewed straw pallets crawling with fleas, doors fashioned from salvaged barrel staves banging open in every gust off the river. Chimneys of clay-daubed sticks belched acrid smoke carrying scents of hoe cake baked on flat rocks, fatback sizzled over open flames, and the faint, underlying bitterness of hopelessness permeating every breath. Hogs rooted in fenced pens nearby, chickens scratched barren yards, a world inverted where human lives sustained animal comforts. Overseer Crawford wasted zero time asserting dominion, a bull-necked Irish immigrant with scarred knuckles from bare-knuckle brawls back in Dublin, a coiled bullwhip slung at his belt like a serpent, face perpetually flushed from corn liquor. "Fields at sunrise, girl, no lollygaggin'," he barked, shoving Sarah toward the women's row with a boot to her thigh that bruised deep purple by nightfall. Her assignment: hoeing and picking teams from dawn's gray light to sunset's bloody hues, quota fixed at 200 pounds of cotton daily, bowls snatched by hand from thorny plants that tore skin like barbed wire, fingers bleeding into the white lint until they resembled raw meat wrapped in gauze. Failure meant the lash, 10 strokes per missed pound, delivered publicly at the whipping post to terrorize the rest into compliance. As first dusk fell that inaugural night, Sarah collapsed onto her pallet in the cabin shared with 7 women, gaps between warped boards letting in squadrons of mosquitoes whining like eternal mourners, their bites swelling into welts that itched through fevered sleep. Distant whippoorwills called from the levee, a mocking lullaby. Freedom was a ghost story whispered in stolen moments. Survival, her only creed, honed sharper than any overseer's blade. Aunt Ruth stirred beside her, murmuring fragments of ancestral prayers in a tongue lost to the Atlantic, hands reaching instinctively for a comfort neither could name. Marcus huddled in the boys' row opposite, stifling sobs that echoed Sarah's own silent resolve. The plantation's rhythm pulsed already. Horn blasts at 4 a.m., fields alive with bent backs by 5, sun climbing merciless, baking sweat into salt crusts on skin. Cotton dust filled lungs like fine poison. Gin stands groaning miles away processing the previous season's yield into bales stamped for Liverpool ships. Whitmore patrolled evenings on horseback, shotgun across saddle, ledger tracking every pound picked, every infraction noted. Sarah traced the cabin's rafters by moonlight filtering through chinks, 17 beams, each notched from makeshift repairs after spring floods. Outside, cicadas screamed crescendo into night, drowning human whispers of resistance brewing in shadows. This was 1846 Mississippi, empire built on broken bodies, where one woman's auction price would ignite a saga defying the system's soul-crushing math. If Sarah's first steps into this nightmare grip you, smash subscribe and notifications. True history demands we confront the shadows without flinching. The Master's Obsession. 15,000 characters exactly. Thomas Whitmore paced his study nightly through the fall of 1846, gas lamps sputtering over yellowed pages of agricultural journals shipped from Charleston and New Orleans, their ink barely dry with treatises on soil rotation and mule breeding. Cotton prices seesawed wildly that year, battered by cheap British imports flooding the market and relentless soil exhaustion on overworked delta acres, squeezing mid-tier planters like him between ruin and riches. Each slave represented depreciating capital, $1.50 sunk if injured or barren, appreciating exponentially if producing strong field hands to swell the workforce gratis. Whitmore devoured texts on livestock improvement with feverish intensity, cold equations twisting in his fevered mind. Thoroughbred mares paired with speed sires yielding champions at auction, sows culled for litter size yielding bacon profits. Why not systematize the same for his human stock? Pseudo-scientific pamphlets from Brazilian fazendas whispered of hybrid vigor, Caribbean planters boasting improved strains from calculated pairings, racial pseudoscience masquerading as progress, justifying the era's dehumanization. His late wife Eliza's death 5 years prior, birthing a stillborn son after prolonged labor, curdled grief into obsession. He blamed weak breeding, projecting failure onto the enslaved rather than his own genetic lottery. For 3 grueling months, Sarah dissolved into the plantation's merciless rhythm, vanishing among 120 souls roused by conch-horn blasts at 4 a.m. sharp, stumbling bleary-eyed into pre-dawn chill where dew-soaked cotton rows gleamed silver under magnolia shadows arching like cathedral vaults. Women hoed in staggered teams, homespun skirts hiked to knees against mud, backs bent double hour after hour as bowls burst open like festering wounds, thorns raking forearms into bloody ribbons that scabbed overnight only to reopen by noon. Lunch breaks snatched under watchful overseer eyes, dented tin pails of hoe cake crumbled coarse from cornmeal ground by hand, greasy fatback rationed to 4 ounces, brackish water hauled from the creek where leeches lurked. Sunset brought staggering exhaustion back to cabins, air alive with muffled coughs racking consumptive lungs, children's wails piercing thin walls, women mending torn sacks by rushlight while men repaired hose dulled on rocky subsoil. Sarah's hands blistered raw first week, then calloused into leather shields. Her quota met through gritted teeth, body adapting like iron forged in hellfire, muscles coiling with each stoop and lift. November chill descended with nor'easters rattling loose cabin shingles, winds howling off the Mississippi like banshees keening for the dead. One fog-shrouded evening after supper, syrupy molasses dribbled over pone as weekly treat. Crawford yanked Sarah from the line, his ham-sized fist bruising her upper arm black and blue, dragging her up the hill path twisting past privies stinking of lye, smokehouses venting hickory-scented ham for Whitmore's table, lanterns casting elongated shadows like accusing specters on oak trunks. The big house interior hit like another world. Polished heart-pine floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers, walls papered in damask florals from Philadelphia, air thick with beeswax polish and pipe tobacco from Whitmore's briar. His study reeked of oiled leather bindings and ink pots, desk cluttered with diagrams sketching breeding pairs beside calf birth weights and mare fertility charts, a brass candelabra dripping wax pools. He barely glanced up from ledgers, circling Sarah slowly like auction merchandise at Natchez, calipers in hand to measure biceps, probing ribs for fat layers non-existent after field toil. Healthy specimen. Fertile age bracket, he muttered clinically, voice devoid of human inflection, pencil-scratching notes, Virginia lineage, potential vigor. Jake materialized from this grotesque calculus, a towering field hand of 27, shoulders broad as plow beams from endless hoeing under levee sun, midnight black skin glistening perpetual sweat sheen, his habitual silence masking a seething intellect honed by stolen Bible studies in hush arbors, verses memorized by moonlight filtering through pine needles. Whitmore's directive landed like a gut punch. Pair Sarah with Jake under supervised conditions, produce offspring inheriting parental stamina for doubled quotas, more profit amortized over decades. Refusal promised whips carving Jake's back-to-bone lattice, worse degradations for Sarah, solitary confinement in the smokehouse, rations halved. But defiance flickered unmistakable in her eyes, a spark piercing Whitmore's delusion of total control. He pivoted ruthlessly to darker arts gleaned from lurid Caribbean planter correspondence smuggled in journals. Equine influence, exposure to imprint superhuman strength, pseudoscience rooted in phrenology tracks proclaiming Africans beast proximate, hybrid vigor yielding Herculean laborers immune to field fevers. To him, economic gospel justifying any horror for ledger balance. Retention hook, the stallion barn awaiting Sarah held torments eclipsing whips, a master's madness etching scars deeper than flesh, whispers racing enslaved networks from Natchez docks to Vicksburg taverns, legend solidifying before first chain rattled. Sarah's nights blurred into mounting dread thereafter, cabin whispers evolving into coded field songs carrying news faster than Pony Express. Swing low, carry me home, signaling barn atrocities on neighbor spreads. Women bartered outright like broodmares at breeding fairs, newborns tallied as assets before first cry faded. Crawford enforced with relish his immigrant failures, evicted Dublin Croft, famine-starved kin, fueling boot-to-back sadism. Sarah clung to humanity fragments amid dissent, mockingbird trilling dawn solos from levee willows, Marcus slipping cornbread crusts under pallets during rain-lashed nights, Aunt Ruth's murmured invocations to ancestral Loa spirits surviving Atlantic horrors. Jake's glances in fields conveyed unspoken alliance, hoe strikes sinking rhythmic rebellion. Whitmore hosted Saturday suppers for peers, planters swapping bourbon tumblers and breeding tips over venison, oblivious to rage percolating below like swamp gas primed to ignite. Sarah's strategic starvation began subtly. Portions palmed to scavenging dogs, body thinning calculatedly to sabotage goals, Aunt Ruth brewing penny-royal teas in secrecy against forced conception. Daily field symphony ground on, sickles swishing cane brakes, children's laughter brutally quelled, sunset levees glowing bloody under god rays piercing thunderheads. Resistance roots delved deeper than cotton taproots piercing clay, alliances forming invisible webs spanning cabins. Whitmore's isolation blinded utterly. Cotton monoculture blinded souls. Sarah mapped patrols, timed gin rotations, resolve hardening flint-like in Madness Forge. This obsession wasn't whim, it was slavery's logical extremity, 1840 SAXS rotten fruit. Cabin gaps whistled winter gales, frost glazing stubble fields outside, but inside burned planning's slow fire. Jake whispered once passing hose, "Hold!" Survivals packed sealed wordlessly. These ledger horrors etched in 1840s diaries demand witness. Share if Sarah's gathering storm stirs your blood to know more. Dawn fog cloaked Whitmore Plantation's outbuildings on a mid-November morning in 1846, thick tendrils curling off the dew-heavy grass like spectral fingers beckoning the damned. Crawford's iron grip yanked Sarah from her pallet before the conchorn's wail, her bare feet sinking into cold mud churned by recent rains, each step sucking at ankles as he dragged her toward the horse barn, a massive oak-beamed structure squatting apart from cabins, its weathered siding patched with cypress slabs, iron-ringed stalls lining both walls like cells in some infernal prison. The air thickened with ammonia sting from trampled manure, undercut by sweet Timothy hay piled in lofts overhead and the primal musk of 20 stallions valued collectively at $10,000. More than most enslaved lives on auction blocks. Caesar dominated the end stall, a 17-hand black thoroughbred imported from Kentucky studs, muscles rippling like coiled cables under glossy midnight hide, his massive chest broad enough to crush ribs with one panicked kick, eyes rolling pearl white at the intruder's scent of terror sweat. Horses sensed human dread instinctively. This one whinnied low and guttural, ears pinned flat against skull, massive hooves stamping divots into straw bedding. Whitmore waited inside, clipboard in hand, lantern casting jittery shadows that danced across cobwebbed rafters like accusing demons. His rationale festered from the era's toxic brew of racial pseudoscience. Phrenology tracks by Samuel Morton claiming African skulls evidenced subhuman intellect, craniometry proving smaller brains meant lesser souls, twisted further by Caribbean planter letters boasting equine vigor infusions for Herculean slaves immune to delta fevers chewing through workforces yearly. Whitmore chained Sarah to a stall post bolted low for livestock restraint, coarse iron-biting wrists raw, skirts hiked brutally to waist exposing her to chill drafts whistling through board gaps, positioned mere feet from Caesar's twitching flank. 4-3 interminable hours per session, thrice weekly across 2 hellish weeks. He and Crawford observed through slatted walls, clipboard scratching notes like deranged scientists, subject proximity 4 feet, stallion agitation noted, potential transference? Caesar paced restlessly, nostrils flaring cherry red, hot breath gusting in panicked blasts that ruffled Sarah's hair, but animal instinct recoiled from human monstrosity. No hooves flew, no teeth snapped. The psychological calculus was precise cruelty. Dehumanize utterly, break spirit through animal juxtaposition, imprinting beast status indelible as brands. Pseudoscience clothed sadism. To Whitmore, economic imperative justified barn horrors eclipsing whips. Sarah's mind fractured under assault then reforged harder. Counting rafters overhead, 27 main beams, each notched from levee flood repairs, memorizing Caesar's flank whirls like topographic maps plotting escape through piney barrens, timing patrols by lantern glimmers fading into swamp mists. Hay dust motes swirled in lantern glow, tickling throats into suppressed coughs, distant field songs wafted on breeze, coded laments carrying barn atrocities faster than postriders. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen, morphing into urgent signals rippling enslaved networks spanning 3 counties. Release after hours brought stumbling collapse back to cabins, legs numb as wood, where Aunt Ruth waded with vinegar-soaked rags to cleanse spirit wounds no soap reached, her gnarled hands tracing protective sigils from African memory surviving Middle Passage holds. Word metastasized via work gangs. Marcus clenched fists till knuckles split white, blood dripping unnoticed into cotton rows. Jake's hoe strikes deepened furrows double time, rhythmic fury sinking with bent backs around him. Plantation machinery ground oblivious. Women ginned last season's cotton by sputtering rushlights till midnight. Men reinforced levees against spring Mississippi floods gnawing banks yearly, swallowing acres and souls alike. Whitmore hosted neighbor planters Saturday eves, lantern-lit suppers in the big house dining hall paneled walnut from Natchez Mills, bourbon tumblers clinking over venison haunches, swapping breeding innovations, laced with phrenology jargon, oblivious to rage percolating below decks like methane primed from swamp muck. Sarah's strategic starvation escalated. Field rations palmed to rooting hogs, body thinning 15 pounds in weeks to sabotage twisted goals, frame wasting while eyes burned sharper. Aunt Ruth brewed herbal arsenal in midnight secrecy. Pennyroyal steeped bitter under floorboards against forced conception, dogwood bark poultices staunching barn-induced bleeds, black cohosh roots crushed fine guarding womb from pseudoscience rape. Cabin life pulsed defiant, children hushed with cornbread crusts during overseer rounds, women mending sacks by needle pricks sinking Morse rebellion, men whittling bone flutes piping spirituals veiling escape codes. The barn's sensory echo haunted fractured sleep, iron clangs reverberating spine deep, Caesar's equine musk clinging skin like shame, Whitmore's detached gray gaze colder than Delta frost glazing stubble fields outside. Yet amid degradation, resolve crystallized diamond hard, survival transmuted terror to tactic, each chain link tallying future reckoning. Field dawns painted levees rose gold through moss-draped live oaks, mockingbird solos piercing fog as communal hush arbors swelled midnight with coded anthems, steal away to Jesus, mapping Natchez safe houses. Crawford's patrols circled tighter, bloodhounds baying phantom trails, but alliances spiderwebbed invisible. Jake slipping salt pork under pallets, Clara from Ho Gang whispering Natchez free black rumors. Whitmore's ledgers swelled losses, Stallion feed outpacing results, isolation blinding him utterly. This wasn't isolated madness, slavery's logical extremity, 1846 pseudoscience rotting deep South core, pseudocraniometry justifying barn as laboratory. Sarah traced stall post gouges by touch post release, each scar map plotting inversion. Master's experiment birthing her phoenix. These documented 1840s ledger atrocities, pseudoscience veiled, demand witness. Share if Sarah's barn-forged steel grips your soul to unearth more buried truths. Winter 1846 clamped Mississippi Delta in skeletal grip. Hoarfrost glazing harvested cotton stubble silver under weak December sun. Nor'easter gales howling through cabin chinks like ancestral whales keening Middle Passage ghosts. Sarah's frame wasted further post-barn. 20 pounds evaporated strategically, cheeks hollowing gaunt while overseers chalked it field laziness, lashes doubling to 20 per infraction, thongs splitting back into lattice crimson weeping through homespun. Fields became covert classroom beside Clara, 35-year survivor whose 3 toddlers fetched $900 Natchez spring prior, ripped aboard flatboats vanishing upriver. Her whispers unveiled Master's profound blind spots, myths positing black women endlessly fertile sans herbal counters, ignorance of moon cycle tinctures passed matrilineally from Senegambia rice fields surviving Atlantic bowels. Clara demonstrated, wild ginger root gnawed raw staunching menses, cotton root bark decoctions barrening wombs selectively, knowledge arsenal defying ledger math. Aunt Ruth deepened arsenal at witching hours past midnight curfew. Dogwood bark infusions staunching hemorrhages from quota whips, black cohosh regulating cycles against violation, rue leaves crushed masking scents alerting patrols. Sarah memorized Whitmore's rhythms surgically. Saturday ledger closings by candle flame tabulating poundage deficits, Sunday church processions where he tithed ostentatiously on slave-picked cotton oblivious to hypocrisy staining his broadcloth. Marcus plotted desperate swamp flights via tangled waterways threading to Ohio river lines, eyes fever-bright recounting runner whispers from Tennessee holds, but Sarah demurred calculatedly. Escapes birth patrols with half-starved bloodhounds scenting terror miles off, recaptures meaning ears cropped, heels tendon slashed, collective whippings terrorizing harbors. Erosion trumped explosion. Survive systemically. erode from vitals like kudzu strangling oaks. Enslaved networks pulsed subterranean. Drummed work songs mimicking Ho's signaling Natchez safe houses coordinates. Bible verses etched palmetto leaves hiding star maps to Canada lines. Hush arbor sermons ciphered with ring shouts veiling abolitionist post drops. Jake rationed stolen bacon slabs from smokehouse midnight raids. Gays locking hers conveying vengeance packed wordless as field grunts. Whitmore's isolation compounded delusion. Cotton monoculture myopia afflicting all tiers. Levee floods yearly swallowing margins blinding broader storms brewing. Sarah architected alibi meticulously. Feign Virginia constitutional barrenness from weak upland stock, deflecting ego blame while preserving resale fiction. Daily drudgery etched resilience indelible. Dawn mists ascending languid off river oxbows mirroring communal breath clouds. Sunset gilding levee crowns through spectral moss festoons. Hush arbors swelling vespertine with spirituals weaving coded defiance. Wade in the water, charting ford shallows evading patrols. One thunderous eve lightning cleaved pecan sentinel near Women's Row, jagged trunk smoking portent, Sarah tracing fresh back scars by pallet emberglow, 27 welts mirroring rafter count, each tallying survival ledgers masters ignored. Clara coached performative submission. Bowed heads veiling predatory calculation, murmured, "Yes, Sue," masking blade-sharp retorts swallowed. Marcus shelved flight fantasies, pivoting quiet sabotage. Plow harnesses loosened fraying mid-furrow, seed corn salted imperceptibly stunting spring stands, cumulative erosion masters attributed poor stock. Whitmore's pseudoscience edifice crumbled inexorably under biology's blunt verdict. Plantation ledgers hemorrhaged red, stallion upkeep devouring margin sands improved issue, neighbor snickers at breeding fairs denting prestige armor. Sarah inhaled freer amid tightening coils, yet dread serpentined deeper. Natchez grapevine buzzed manumission rarities via free black barbershops ciphering funds. William Johnson whispers threading cotton factors. Cabin symphonies sustained. Children fingerspelling ABCs palmed during noon pail breaks. Women quilting storycloths encoding underground waypoints. Men bone-carving whistles piping alert tones mimicking Bob White calls. Crawford's liquor haze slackened vigilance Friday's post-whiskey rations. Patrols looping predictable quarter miles. Jake synced Ho arcs hers rhythmic Morse during endless rows, solidarity palpable as shared sweat salt. Winter solstice hush arbor climaxed ring shout crescendo, free at last mantra invoking ancestors outpacing slave ships. Sarah envisioned inversion, barn degradation alchemizing phoenix defiance, master's experiment self-immolating. Field vignettes etched memory, mockingbird mimicking overseer curses dawn perches, fireflies semaphore-ling dusk levies, communal pots bubbling sassafras tea veiling strategy sessions. Clara recounted sibling sales. Brother auctioned $800 Vicksburg, sister breed till Baron discarded, fueling vow unbroken. Marcus whittled cross slinging hidden razor shard, eyes promising utility. Ruth's Loa invocations summoned resilience ancestral, herbs steaming cauldron shadows. Whitmore's church tithes bought indulgences ignoring hell's financed, isolation absolute. Sarah's narrative crystallized flawless, barren ploy deflecting rage, alliances stealing breach. Freedom's perfume tantalized Natchez winds, free black enclaves defying odds, manumission petitions threading white patrons. Perfection imperative. One slippy word spelled gibbet. This silent warfront slavery ignored. Psychic insurgency outmatching chains, 1846 delta roots delving deeper than cotton empires piercing clay marrow. Cabin frost glitter mornings yielded to mud-slogging dawns, but internal fires blazed unquenched. Jake's single whisper passing pales, endure, pact etched blood deep. Doctor's summons validated lie surgically, igniting Whitmore's climactic cruelty, dollar sale erasure bid. But Sarah's engineered narrative poised counterstrike lethal. Resistance Web's history obscured demand excavation. Like slash comment if Sarah's herbal insurgency ignites your quest for silenced truths. February 1847 thawed the Mississippi Delta into treacherous quagmires, muddy ruts swallowing wagon wheels knee-deep as cotton gins hummed feverishly in preparation for spring planting season. Massive wooden presses groaning under last year's compressed bales stamped for Liverpool freighters battling slumping prices. Whitmore's pseudoscientific edifice teetered, 3 months post-barn yielded 0, improved issue. Stallion upkeep hemorrhaging margins while neighbor planters snickered at breeding fairs over bourbon tumblers about his equine folly. Desperate for validation, he summoned Dr. Henry Morrison from Natchez, a paunchy 50-year-old surgeon whose black leather bag bulged with speculums, calipers, and lancets honed for slave examinations netting $5 per fitness certification. His carriage funded by Delta planters demanding proof of breeding soundness before purchases exceeding $1,000. Morrison arrived at noon under pewter skies threatening nor'easters, his gig splashing through levee puddles, Whitmore greeting him at the big house veranda with crystal decanter of corn whiskey, voices murmuring phrenology jargon, cranial capacity deficits, uterine vigor metrics, as if dissecting hogs at county fairs. The venue, Caesar's former stall, hay dust moat swirling eternal in lantern shafts piercing board gaps, ammonia tang undiminished by winter winds scouring the structure's eaves. Sarah was yanked from hoe gang mid-row, Crawford's boot spurring her through churned clay slick as hog wallow, chains rebbeting wrists raw from prior sessions, skirts mud-caked to thighs as she stumbled into the barn's gloom where Morrison waited in broadcloth coat, brass speculum glinting ominous beside inkpot and ledger. Whitmore hovered like vulture, gray eyes fever-bright demanding diagnosis. Why no foal from equine protocol? Morrison prodded clinically, Ira's quackery arsenal deployed. Fingers probing pelvis for pelvic tilt angles, calipers spanning skull ridges per Morton's craniometry tables, proving African inferiority, vaginal speculum insertion eliciting suppressed gasps amid hay-scented chill drafts whistling rafters. No pregnancy confirmed. Biology's verdict inexorable. Morrison couched failure in racist fiction, constitutional uterine debility from Virginia upland strain, inferior fecundity metrics, pseudoscience deflecting blame from Whitmore's delusion onto Sarah's defective stock, phrenology tracks cited verbatim from his satchel, smaller cranial vaults correlate barren wombs. Whitmore's face mottled purple with vein-throbbing rage, $150 investment evaporated, prestige cratered among peers mocking his barn laboratory as barnyard farce. Sarah, worthless merchandise demanding excision from ledgers. Whispers ignited immediately. Crawford dispatched to Natchez trader taverns circulating rumors via cotton factors. Barren nag, sullen disposition, stallion failed reject. Resale price slashed performative to $1. Public shaming spectacle dwarfing auction humiliations. Broadcasting failure across Adams County networks where planters tallied breeding ROI like dividend yields. Sarah overheard from cabin shadows as Crawford bellowed to field hands, heart surging paradoxical. Rock-bottom valuation accelerated sale, potentially kinder hands than Whitmore's pseudoscience hell. Enslaved grapevine ignited subterranean, field songs ciphering dollar wench Natchez bound, hush arbors buzzing William Johnson intel. Natchez's preeminent free black barber entrepreneur, 3-story Franklin Street mansion bustling freedman networks, diarist chronicling white absurdities, resources stretched thin but $1 feasible amid strategic manumissions threading white patrons. Aunt Ruth slipped corn husk charm night prior. Doll-stuffed sacred soil from Sarah's Virginia girlhood field, murmured Loa blessings surviving Atlantic chains. Jake gripped forearm once passing pails, calluses rasping solidarity. Rise Phoenix. Clara nodded from gin stand, eyes promising herbal continuity. Crawford mocked openly at whipping post rallies, $1 trash. Field hands averting gazes veiling volcanic fury. Marcus palming razor shard whittled crosswise for breech utility. Whitmore washed ledger hands clean, experiment column slashed red ink final. Isolation absolute as cotton monoculture myopia blinded brewing tempests. Sarah walked imperceptibly straighter amid chaos, alibi deployed flawless. Feigned broken slump masking calculations, Natchez market rhythms memorized, dawn flatboat gangs, noon peak auctions, Johnson's barbershop coordinates via Clara's upriver kin whispers. Cabin vigils swelled, women quilting escape quilts encoding star paths, children fingerspelling manumission petitions palmed during rations, Ruth brewing farewell sassafras masking strategy conclaves. Distant Mississippi thunder rolled omens, levees glistening mud slick under weak sun, mockingbird solos piercing fog heralding inversion. Crawford's patrols bade phantom trails tighter, bloodhounds slavering quota terror, but alliances steel-webbed lethal. Jake salting Whitmore's private whiskey cask subtly, Marcus loosening wagon harness pins imperceptibly. Morrison departed $10 richer, conscience flicker unacknowledged, guilt gnawing post-gossip circuits denting his circuit. Sarah traced barn post gouges farewell, each scar topographing triumph nascent. This inspection wasn't endpoint. Catalyst igniting master's self-immolation, pseudoscience pyre fueling phoenix ascent. Field vignettes etched indelible, sunset god rays gilding cotton stubble spectral, firefly semaphores dusk levies, communal pots bubbling resilience broths. Clara recounted kin sales fueling vow. Brother $800 Vicksburg vanish, sister bread baron discarded swamps. Networks pulsed defiant. Natchez free black enclaves defying 1847 chains, manumission rarities threading legislative labyrinths. Perfection imperative. Slip meant gibbet dawn. Whitmore's church tithes bought phantom indulgences ignoring financed infernos. Delta winds carried Natchez perfume tantalizing. Barbershop codes, petition guarantors. Sarah's engineered narrative poised counterstrike flawless, resistance insurgency outpacing chains mathematically. Cabin frost mornings yielded mud dawns, internal infernos unquenched eternal. Jake's gaze locked final, claim. Packed blood forged. Pseudoscience veils history's ledgers demand excavation, like if Sarah's inspected steel ignites quest for obscured resistances. Dollar sale spectacle loomed shaming engineered, but Johnson's bid poised inversion deadlier than whips. March 1847 Natchez market throbbed visceral artery of Deep South infamy. Levee docks groaned under flatboat gangs unloading 500 Africans weekly from coastwise schooners reeking Middle Passage residue. Auction stands clustered central square stinking unwashed terror sweat mingled tobacco spittle. Chains clanking perpetual dirge beneath auctioneer cadences booming, prime gangs, Delta hardened. Whitmore's mud-splattered wagon creaked dawn entry, Sarah chained solitary bench. No overseer escort requisite for dollar trash. Crawford dispatching field boy Zeke reins in hand through Pine Barrens rut slick spring downpours. The block redux, same splintered planks blistering Saul's memory. Auctioneer hawking spectacle cruel, $1 bargain, folks. Baron nag, stallion reject, buyer beware defective stock. Crowd erupting guttural laughter. Tobacco quid spitters jeering lurid uses for buck slave skin crawling visceral. Bids mock minimal till rearward voice sliced crisp, $1 even. William Johnson materialized impeccable dove gray suit silk cravat marking free status defiant. Barber entrepreneur par excellence whose $40,000 property empire defied Mississippi codes. Diarist skewering white hypocrisy's ledgers. Auctioneer hesitated. Sales free blacks legal rare incendiary. Johnson repeating firm. Gavel cracking final amid stunned hush rippling trader ranks. Whispers metastasized instantaneous. Johnson's folly. Dollar wench? Wagon trundled Franklin Street midday. Manicured gardens bursting azaleas framing three-story mansion walls French floral papered. Parlor upright piano polished mahogany gleaming incongruous sanctuary. Wife and proffered tin cup spring water sands command tone. Sarah sipping disoriented kindness alienating decades degradations. Hands trembling uncontrollably initial. Still chattel Mississippi statute. Purchase mere transfer. Manumission labyrinthine demanding legislative petition. $1,000 bonds posted guarantors swearing no public charge burden. White sponsors testifying self-sufficiency improbable era. Johnson outlined surgical post-supper parlor conference. Gas lamps flickering ledger pages. Household service path treating fairly legally enslaved perpetual or freedom gauntlet threading Natchez courthouse mazes. Success microscopic amid 1847 codes tightening free black nooses. Sarah elected gauntlet resolute, literacy weapon vowed, and initiating candlelit primers post-curfew illegal fire fueling ambition clandestine. ABC's palmed during laundry boils veiling abolitionist codes. Johnson's orbit unveiled free black cosmos. Barbershop clippers snipping gossip ciphered underground routes. AME church basements plotting aid flatboat hides. Women's societies quilting star maps in coded palmetto. Threats omnipresent. Patrols shredding papers pretextual. Kidnappings reselling, vagrants, Vicksburg blocks routine. Sarah absorbed ledger tallying flawless. Numbers unlocking emancipation arithmetic masters ignored. Cabin scars itched, phantom barn chains dissolved, yet trauma coiled visceral. Caesar's breath gusts haunting dreams, Whitmore's gaze colder ledgers. 2 years fragile sanctuary tested paper freedom viability. 1847 to 1849 Natchez pulsed tension. Compromise 1850 omens strengthening fugitive hunts, Dred Scott whispers eroding manumission precedents. Johnson's lobbying stalled legislative thickets, funds earmarked strategic buys evaporating levee breaches. Sarah thrived domestic vanguard, kitchens yielding haute Creole sans lash threads, laundering broadcloths white wire precision, literacy exploding. New Testament devoured midnight, ledgers balanced impeccably exposing cotton frauds. And taught ciphered correspondence. Bible verses veiling past forgery routes, herbal pharmacopoeia expanding Ruth's arsenal against patrols. Free black networks spiderwebbed lethal. Dockworkers signaling runner flatboats lantern blinks, midwives concealing runaways attics, barbershop mirrors reflecting escape coordinates. Morrison resurfaced conscience-haunted 1848 gossip circuits post-Whitmore ruin whispers. Plantation mortgaged breeding failures, suicide murmurs tavern lore. His affidavit golden. Sarah, industrious domestic paragon, self-supporting verifiable. Lie engineered satisfying codes guarantor whitewash. Bonds posted March 15, 1849. 26 free legal ink dry. Life sharpened post papers. Pass forging Natchez fugitives riverine lines. Literacy classes hush churches. Testimony circuits abolitionist pamphlets anonymized. Threats endured. Patrols ignoring papers pretext. Resurrections blocks nocturnal. Sarah alchemized trauma steel eternal. Whitmore's dollar shame inverted triumph bargain. Barn pseudoscience catalyzing Phoenix ascent defying ledgers. Cabin echoes faded Johnson's piano vespers. Fireflies semaphoring dusk gardens liberty nascent. Clara Kin Natchez reunions whispered continuity. Jake Rumor's resistance ripples Adams' remnants. Ruth's Loa charms potency peaked freedom dawn. Mockingbird solos heralding inversion complete. Networks defiant pulsed. Free enclaves odds-defying empires. Petitions threading mazes mathematical. Perfection yielded gibbet-dodged triumph. Sarah's narrative counterstruck flawless. Delta Zephyrs carried abolitionist perfumes. Church codes, flatboat whispers. Internal infernos blazed communal beacons unquenched. Johnson's gaze paternal final, claimed. Packed Phoenix forged eternal. Field vignettes memory indelible. Levee sunset spectral moss festoons. Communal pots resilient symphonies. Firefly dusk codes eternal. Networks insurgency outpaced chains ledger-proof. 1847 Delta roots delving marrow victorious. Mansion frost mornings yielded liberty dawns unchained. Fragile sanctuary tested scars healing. Legal ink versus trauma tides. Brewing war winds beckoning testimony thunder. Dollar inversion's history buried demand resurrection. Subscribe Sarah's Phoenix ignites silenced saga quests. Natchez in 1849 was a city balanced on a knife's edge between bondage and a fragile, conditional idea of freedom. River mist rolled in each morning from the Mississippi, wrapping the bluff in a gray veil that made steamboat whistles sound like mournful horns from another world. In the Johnson household on Franklin Street, Sarah woke before first light, not to the scream of a horn or the crack of a whip, but to the soft creak of floorboards and the distant clink of kettles in the kitchen. The air smelled of coffee, lye soap and starch instead of smoke from crude cabin chimneys. Yet even here, in a house owned by a free black man, the law still named her property. William Johnson had bought her for $1 in front of white men who laughed, spat, and called it a fool's purchase. In his ledger, though, he listed her with care. Sarah, about 23 or 24, bought of Whitmore, Adams County. Price: $1. Condition: abused but strong. Prospects: uncertain, but worth the risk. There was no calculation about breeding, no mention of stallions or stock. His arithmetic was different. He saw labor, yes, but also a mind and a will that had survived things most people could not even voice. He explained the reality slowly, over several evenings, sitting at a small table in the back room while his children slept upstairs. Under Mississippi law, she remained enslaved, bound to him instead of Whitmore. The state did not recognize her suffering, only the transfer of ownership. To free her, Johnson would have to petition officials, put up money as a guarantee she would never become a burden, and convince white men who believed in the natural order of chains that a black woman deserved to stand outside them. He laid out the options in simple terms: stay as a servant in his house, protected but never totally safe from a world that could change its mind about free people of color overnight, or embark on a long, uncertain process toward manumission that could be blocked at any step by a judge's pen or a politician's mood. Sarah listened, hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered in the old habit, but her mind raced. She thought of Whitmore's barn, of Caesar's hot breath, of the doctor's cold instruments. She thought of Ruth's herbs and Clara's whispers, of Jake swinging a hoe with murderous grace. Every memory argued against staying half-enslaved by choice. She chose the fight. And Johnson, William's wife, became her quiet ally. In the spaces between sweeping floors, boiling linens and polishing brass, and began to teach her letters, using the back pages of old newspapers and the margins of discarded broadsides. At first, the shapes looked like new kinds of chains, strange looping symbols that made no sense. But as the weeks passed, sounds attached themselves to lines, syllables formed, and words that had always belonged to other people began to open for her. She read notices about slave auctions and runaway rewards that mirrored her own past. She saw her world described from a distance, cold and transactional, and that knowledge burned hot and bright. Literacy gave her a new kind of weapon. It let her read Johnson's ledgers and see which white men paid on time and which cheated him. It let her track dates and names, to understand how slavery reached from courthouse to dock, from cotton press to bank in New Orleans. It showed her that the system was not chaos but a structure, and structures, no matter how massive, had weak points. In the evenings, the Johnson parlor became a crossroads. Free black men in pressed coats and women in simple but carefully maintained dresses came and went, their visits cloaked as social calls. Behind closed doors, they spoke of laws tightening around free people of color, of new proposals to expel them from the state, of rumors that any black person without perfect papers could be seized and sold. They also spoke of possibilities, of northern cities where a black woman could walk down a street without risking the auction block, of churches where congregations organized fund drives to buy freedom one person at a time. Sarah stood in doorways, tray in hand, listening while pretending not to listen. Every name, every place, every law discussed became part of a map in her mind. She learned which judges were cruel, which could be pressured, and which avoided these cases altogether. She heard about a white lawyer in town who sometimes took on petitions for manumission for a fee, not out of mercy but because he liked to show off his ability to bend complicated laws to his will. The petition for her freedom did not appear overnight. It emerged slowly from conversations, from calculations, from careful timing. Johnson had to demonstrate that she had skills beyond the field, that she could support herself. He had to present her not as a victim of monstrous experiments, but as a diligent domestic worker who would not embarrass or threaten the white power structure. It was a bitter twist. The very system that had degraded her now demanded proof of her respectability before loosening its grip. While he maneuvered, she worked. She scrubbed floors until the boards shone, laundered shirts so precisely that even the most demanding white customers could not complain, and learned to keep books well enough that Johnson trusted her with sums that would once have seemed unimaginable. At night, she read by candle stub until her eyes burned, devouring every scrap of information she could find about laws, places, and wars far beyond the Mississippi. News drifted down the river of growing tensions between North and South, of arguments in Washington over new territories and whether they would carry chains or not. For the first time, Sarah saw slavery not just as the world but as a contested thing, something men wrote speeches about and voted on. That knowledge did not free her, but it made the walls of the cage visible. Then, one afternoon, Johnson returned from town with his face set in a way she had not seen before. He called her into the back room, laid a folded paper on the table and stepped back. His hands, usually so steady with razor and shears, trembled slightly. "Read it," he said. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the document. The letters swam for a moment, then resolved into words she understood. Her name, her age guessed at, a description of dark complexion and sound mind, and then, in formal language, the declaration that she was to be considered free. The signatures of white men adorned the bottom like a row of iron nails sealing a door. It was fragile, revocable, and dependent on a dozen legal fictions, but it was more than she had ever been allowed. She did not cry. The habit of holding everything inside was too deep. Instead, she let out a slow breath that felt as if it had been building since the day the auctioneer first put his hand on her shoulder in Virginia. The barn had not broken her. Whitmore's experiment, meant to reduce her to breeding stock, had pushed her into the path of the only man in Natchez willing and able to buy her for herself instead of for his profit. Freedom, she understood instantly, was not a clean break. It was a narrow bridge over a chasm, and the boards beneath her feet could rot, crack, or be kicked out by forces she could not control. But standing on that bridge was still better than drowning quietly in the depths. The next morning, when she stepped into the street with her papers folded against her chest, the city looked the same. Dust in the gutters, white men on balconies, enslaved people carrying loads along the sidewalks. Yet something had shifted. If a patrol stopped her now, she had a weapon that did not bruise the skin but might hold back the whip for a moment. It was a thin shield, but it was hers. Her first act as a free woman in law, though not yet in spirit, was not to leave. She did not run north or board a boat to some unknown city. She stayed in Natchez, in the shadow of the markets, because she had lived through a barn where a man tried to breed her like an animal and walked out with her mind intact. She believed that surviving in place, and helping others survive, was its own kind of rebellion. The price of her freedom had been set at $1 in public, but she knew the true cost. Every lash, every night in the stall, every humiliation she had refused to let define her. The system had tried to turn her into a failed investment. She would turn herself into something it could not account for at all. Freedom on paper did not erase the brand slavery had burned into Sarah's days. It changed the angle of the sun, but not its heat. Natchez remained a city where, at any moment, a white man could decide that a black person's documents were forged or insufficient, and the road back to the auction block would open beneath their feet. Sarah learned to live with that constant, invisible edge pressed against her throat. She carried her freedom papers in a small oilcloth bundle under her dress, close enough to feel the crinkle of the folded sheet with every breath. She checked it 3 times a day without meaning to, fingers grazing the spot as a reflex. Patrols roamed the streets more often now, muttering about runaways and northern agitators. Men who had once nodded politely to Johnson in the barber shop began to eye his clients with open suspicion. Yet between these threats, a different life slowly unrolled. Sarah began to spend her evenings not just reading for herself but teaching others. Not formally, not in any organized school, but in back rooms and church basements, tracing letters on rough planks while someone kept watch at the window. Formerly enslaved men and women, recently bought free or self-purchased, sat hunched on benches, tongues between their teeth in concentration, as they sounded out the same notices that had once advertised their own bodies for sale. She told no one the full truth about Whitmore's barn. She offered pieces, hints, the outline of a cruelty that made people nod in grim recognition, but she kept the worst details locked away. There were some memories that helped no one by being repeated. Instead, she talked about the herbs Ruth had used, about the quiet refusals and small sabotages that had opened cracks in Whitmore's control. She framed her survival not as miracle but as a set of choices, limited and brutal, made again and again under pressure. When the Compromise of 1850 passed, tightening fugitive slave laws and turning the entire country into a hunting ground for anyone who had ever worn chains, the ripples reached even to Natchez. Men and women who had escaped to northern cities were dragged back in irons, their stories told in whispers and pamphlets that Sarah read until the pages smudged. Some free blacks in Natchez spoke seriously of leaving, of uprooting their fragile gains and trying their chances in Canada or in free black settlements further north. Sarah considered it. The idea of never again seeing the fields where she had bled, of putting an ocean of miles between herself and Whitmore's memory, had a deep pull. But every time she thought about leaving, she saw the faces of the people who still walked past the auction yard every day with chains around their wrists. She could imagine safety for herself. She could not imagine carrying it comfortably while others remained trapped. So she stayed and built a life in tension. She worked for wages now, not as much as white servants might earn, but enough to accumulate a little money of her own. She rented a small room not far from the Johnsons, modest and sparsely furnished, but it was the first space she had ever had where no one could enter without her permission. She swept that room every morning with a care that bordered on reverence, dusting each corner as if cleansing it of ghosts. As the 1850s progressed, the country around her grew more brittle. Newspapers she read in secret began to speak openly of war, of secession, of a future where the entire structure of slavery might be challenged by force instead of argument. Natchez merchants worried about markets and trade, planters muttered about northern arrogance, and in enslaved quarters all along the river, people listened and tried to figure out what it would mean if the world that had defined their suffering suddenly cracked. When the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter in 1861, Sarah was in her late 30s. She received the news not as a distant event but as the next turn in a story that had been building around her since birth. The war turned Natchez into a place of sudden reversals. Union gunboats appeared on the river, their black silhouettes and smoking stacks like omens. White masters who had once swaggered along the levee began to talk about hiding valuables and moving cotton inland. Enslaved people poured into town from surrounding plantations, some following the blue uniforms, others simply seizing the chaos as a chance to run. They arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs and scars like hers. The makeshift camps that sprang up on the edges of Natchez were full of hunger, disease, and desperate hope. It was there that Sarah found her next purpose. She walked into the camps not as a savior but as someone who knew what it felt like to have your world uprooted overnight. She helped organize food lines, taught mothers how to boil water properly to keep their children from dying of preventable fevers, and set up corners where she once again traced letters on planks with chalk. She explained what papers meant, what names mattered in a court, how to answer when a white officer asked where you came from. When Union officers began taking testimonies about conditions on plantations, Sarah stepped forward. She spoke of cotton quotas and whip scars, of auctions and forced separations, of nights in a barn with a stallion pacing nearby while white men watched. She did not offer it as a plea for pity but as evidence. Every detail she shared was a brick in a case she hoped the world would eventually build against the system that had created Whitmore and men like him. The war ended in 1865. The 13th Amendment wrote into law what she had felt in her bones the day she read her own freedom papers: that slavery, at least in its legal form, could be ended. Bells rang in cities she would never see, crowds filled streets, and men in uniforms made speeches about a new birth of freedom. In Natchez, the response was more muted. Many white families went into mourning for a way of life they claimed had been taken from them. For the people who had been that way of life, the celebrations were tempered by caution. Reconstruction brought possibilities and dangers in equal measure. For a time, black men voted and held office. Schools opened where none had stood before. Sarah watched younger people, those who had been children when she was in the barn, stand in classrooms and recite lessons from books she would only ever partly know. She took satisfaction in that, even as she saw how fragile it all was. White resistance grew slowly at first and then with terrifying speed. Night riders appeared, masked and armed, punishing anyone they thought had gone too far. Laws changed again, closing off paths that had barely had time to form. Some of the men she had taught to write their names were beaten for trying to cast ballots. Some disappeared entirely. By then, Sarah was an older woman. Her body carried the accumulated damage of years in the fields and the barn. Her hands ached in the winter, and some mornings it took her a long time to stand up straight. But her mind remained clear. She spent her last years doing what she had done since she first stepped into the Johnsons' backroom, passing on what she knew. She told younger women about herbs and about boundaries, about the importance of naming what had been done to them even if the law never punished it. She spoke in church meetings about the difference between survival and surrender, about how getting through a day under someone else's power did not erase one's humanity. She insisted that their children learn to read, no matter what new restrictions were placed on them, because words were tools no one could take back once given. When she died in 1889, in her mid-60s, Natchez was a different place on the surface. Slaves no longer stood on the auction block. The horse barn where Whitmore had tried to turn her into an experiment had long since collapsed or been rebuilt for some other use. The world had moved on, as it always does. But beneath those changes, the same old arguments about race, power, and who deserved to be fully human continued. Her grave was simple, marked by a small stone at the edge of a black cemetery on higher ground, safe from the river's floods. The carving said only, "Sarah Johnson, born in bondage, lived free." It did not mention Whitmore. It did not mention Caesar or the doctor or the price of $1. Those details lived on in stories told in kitchens and on porches, passed from mouth to mouth, reshaped but never erased. The true cost of her survival was written not in ledgers but in the lives she touched, in a boy who learned to sign his name before a registrar, in a woman who refused a master's hand because she knew there were ways to protect herself, in a generation that understood that slavery had been a system, not a destiny. The men who had tried to turn her into breeding stock were gone. The people she had helped still carried her name. In the end, the system that had measured her in dollars and pounds of cotton could not account for the value of a mind that refused to break. That was the one thing it could never own.